Stories from Real Life is an independent podcast that is written and produced by Melvin E. Edwards. You can get details about each episode or contribute to the future success of this show by visiting the website at www.podcastreallife.com.
On today's edition of Stories from Real Life with Melvin E. Edwards, our guest today is David Beckemeyer, the host of the Outrage Overload podcast. David is an expert in political polarization and media literacy, focusing on reducing toxic outrage and promoting civil discourse. With insights from social psychology and communication studies, David helps listeners understand the mechanics behind outrage media and offers practical strategies for fostering unity and understanding in a divided world. Let's join today's guest, David Beckemeyer, and your host, Melvin E. Edwards.
You are listening to Stories from Real Life, a podcast by engaging storytellers for engaged story listeners. Here's your host, author and journalist, Melvin E. Edwards.
Hello again, and welcome to this week's episode of Stories from Real Life. I'm your host, Melvin E. Edwards. Thanks for joining me on this week's learning adventure. As you heard in the intro, our guest this week is Outrage Overload podcast host, David Beckemeyer. Hello, David, and thank you for joining me today.
Hello, Melvin, and it's absolutely my pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me on.
So do you think any of our listeners are already outraged by what we may or may not say during the discussion today?
It's likely. Yeah, it doesn't take much to get people outraged anymore. We're going to try not to, but it still doesn't take much to get people going.
So what inspired you to start the Outrage Overload podcast?
Yeah, I mean, we've all kind of been through this, a lot of political heat up over the last, let's say, well, in some sense, the last 30 years, but certainly there's been a big ramp up. I think you first had sort of the 2016 elections. People got pretty intense about that. That got a lot of people angry with each other and people, disconnecting and breaking friendships and things over politics. And then we had COVID and the lockdowns, and that started a whole nother wave of that, people with different positions there. And we saw more of that kind of disconnecting on Facebook or blocking people and then disconnecting in real life. I mean, it seems like everybody, since I've been doing this show for a couple of years now, it seems like everybody has a story like, well, we don't invite, Uncle Larry to Thanksgiving anymore kind of story, or I don't talk to my brother-in-law or something like that. It seems like everybody has stories like that. And so that was just kind of swirling around out there for me. And then it got even more personal, right? When I was one of those guys getting on Twitter fights and people in my family were, having these kind of conversations or, breaking friendships and stuff, or, breaking with family members. So it just started to get more and more personal, even beyond just seeing it and experiencing it out in life and through less closely connected folks. Suddenly it was much more closely connected. And I think the thing that finally pushed me over the edge is when my son, who's, a millennial, and they're pretty active on social media, and he got off social media entirely. And so that was so I had a conversation with him about that, like what's going on there. And so that was kind of an interesting, kind of wake up call for me that there's a lot of people being affected by this. And so I started researching, this state we're in and how we're easily riled up, and there's a lot of people intentionally doing that. And that's what got me and said, okay, there's a thing here. There's something to talk about.
All right. So in this age we live in of quote unquote fake news, are we conditioned to disbelieve every negative story and mistrust those who deliver the news to us?
Well, that certainly happened to a degree, right? I mean, there's been a lot of, some of it is that aspect of, it really does down to come to what you say. It starts off with the trust thing, right? That's really what has happened, that, we have a whole bunch of cognitive biases that cause us to view the news certain ways. And we all have this. There's not like it's not limited to Republicans or Democrats or whatever. We all have these same cognitive biases. Things like, trying to find the answer that you want. So when we like the answer, we accept that information no matter the source. We don't like the answer, we're going to challenge the source. And and then there's been just that natural innate part of our biases. And then there's also been like bad actors who will then leverage that animosity and those fears and get us riled up even more. And once they've been able to activate that emotional part of our brain, we don't tend to want to do. We just don't do the critical thinking that we'd have to do. We're not very good at it. Once our emotions get engaged, they kind of overwhelm everything. So we're no longer either interested or able to do the kind of critical thinking that you have to do when we sort of have to engage the front part of our brain and think about it. It's a little bit, you might have heard about the sort of thinking fast and slow stuff where, once your emotions get engaged, a lot of that fast acting part of your brain is sort of taken over. And but that thinking part is kind of the slower part. So that's kind of what happens. So yeah, so the trust is a huge factor, and it's going to be tough to get back because there's a lot of reasons for it. There's not just like one thing you can magically point at to fix it, because to some extent there's been grains of truth in a lot of these kind of what is often called misinformation. There's sometimes grains of truth in there, or there was a misinterpretation. It was poorly communicated. Like someone, it may have looked like they may have made an assertion that they were making. Maybe that scientists or a government agency had made assertions that they were making with too much certainty, and then they had to roll that back. And they should have probably never used that much certainty, right? They weren't really lying to anybody. They weren't trying to be mischievous in most cases, but it kind of can look that way a little bit, especially if somebody's going to then try to exacerbate that and make it worse. So then there's a little grain of truth there. Like, oh, wait, they took that back, and so that means maybe this other stuff's not true either. And so there's been this big change towards the amount of trust there is in science. There's been a big change in the amount of trust there is in government information. There's been, we don't trust a lot of things. Education, we're not sure about education. Like there's a lot of trends towards homeschooling and things like that. So all kinds of institutions have a trust crisis right now. And it does get to this point that people start to not trust anything. And then that doesn't work either. You have to have some trusted sources. We don't have enough brain power to have all the information in our head and know everything. There's going to have to be times when we have to trust somebody else. And it's just tough to live your life in a way where you don't trust anything, and it's a big challenge. And it's even worse because you don't trust an academic, but you'll trust like some guy in a basement on a YouTube video.
Yeah, so probably a healthy dose of skepticism is necessary. But what's the difference between being a skeptic and being a contrarian?
Right. And a lot of people confuse that. Like, it's kind of cool to be, contrarian. It's kind of cool to be a cynic to a degree, right? And it's kind of easy too. Like, if I always say everything's going to end badly, I kind of can't go wrong, right? It takes away some vulnerability because I can just always say, well, it's going to be terrible. I'm Eeyore, from Winnie the Pooh kind of thing. And I don't ever have to kind of make a commitment about maybe things will be okay. So that's that cynicism, that contrarian, where you're just going to disagree with it for the sake of disagreeing with it. Doesn't really get you anywhere. Whereas, obviously skepticism is good. And the key to sort of looking at these things is evidence, right? And then trying to figure out what's the evidence for this position and what's the credibility of the source, right? So, and everybody has some different metrics they use for that, but, you're not going to magically remove the fact that you need to have some trustworthy sources, but you need to then check those sources too. Like, and a big challenge we have with the world now, we think research means like doing a Google search, but real research, means you're checking the sources of the sources of the sources of the sources, and it's a lot of work. And that's why we have academics, and that's why we have things like peer-reviewed journals and things like that, because then that whole system is sort of doing some critical thinking for us in some sense, right? They've done some of that work for us because they did the peer review. They looked at the data, and it was the idea was there was a team of folks that did a formal critical thinking sort of thing for us. Now, does that mean you just take every single research paper at face value? No, because sometimes that's got its own challenges. Like, oh, wait, there's some data here that seems funky, or I think they left this factor out. That's okay. Like, you can be that kind of a skeptic. But then what's your evidence for that? Like, what's that contrary evidence look like? And where does that fit in, this overall the overall blanket of information that we have, the overall collection of information that we have? Like, if you're really out there in left field all the time, do you really think you've figured everything out? You're the one person who can solve this problem? Like, probably not, right? Yeah, it happens once in a while. You're the next, Da Vinci or whatever, but most of us probably aren't. And so we sometimes have to be careful about if we're always contrary of everything and this whole pool of knowledge. That might be probably another way to think about things. Might be to go look at yourself a little bit, right? I mean, a lot of the things that makes my show a challenge is that a lot of what we talk about is basically we have to look inwardly and look at ourselves a lot of time and look at our own side. A lot of these problems are, it's easy to criticize the other side. We do that all the time. It's like all anybody wants to do. But sometimes you have to be critical of your own side and the people that sort of are saying things you agree with, but is their data good? Is their evidence actually good? We often don't check them because they're saying the things we want to hear. But that's what we have to start doing more of, is also check our own side.
Okay. So how do we get to the point where fact-checking is considered to be censorship?
Yeah, it's a tough situation. And yeah, it's really frustrating because and I saw in the recent thing where Meta has, you may have already talked about this a little bit, where Meta is talking about getting rid of the fact checkers and all that. And I don't really have a problem with that per se, but the way that he presented it and the way he pitched it, that, as you're saying, as if it's biased and it's censorship, well, that's just nonsense, right? That's not true at all. And there was, the fact checkers themselves did sort of do a rebuttal on that. And they said, basically he knows that's nonsense. He's just saying that to satisfy the new administration, But that doesn't mean there isn't bias in all these things. There's always some bias, but that's why you have, rigorous systems to sort of check some of that bias, right? And that's also why when a quality fact checker is going to list the evidence for why they disagree with that thing, right? They'll make citations and say, look, here's a quote, like here's the YouTube video of the guy saying it, or something like that, right? So that's what we have to return to, is that we have to look at the evidence for these things, rather than just whether it fits our desired outcome, the confirmation bias that we're looking for. We need to really remember that there's got to be evidence for this position. It's easy to say this stuff, but what's your evidence for it? How do you back it up?
Okay, so what is?
But yeah, how do you get there to think that fact checking is censorship? I mean, how you get there, really? I've been doing the show 2 years now, so I should know how this works, even though I get surprised by it all the time. And how you get there is this animosity and which is just a whole bunch of emotion. But basically, we've become so tribal in our thinking, we've become so set in our thinking that we're so right, and they have this certainty about us being right, and the other side is so wrong. Not only are they wrong, they're evil, basically. They have bad intentions. And we really believe this now. We've gotten to the point where we buy into that idea. And how can I say, both sides think that. Like I heard one of your guests say something like, I'll just say one of the political parties is crazy. Well, they think the same thing about you, right? and I think that's where. So what happens is we get so attached to this thinking that anybody that's not agreeing with us or not putting out not saying what feels right to us must be like evil and have bad intent. And so that's really how you get to the point where fact checking becomes censorship. Because if I don't like what the fact checkers are coming back with, it must be a plot. Like they must be, and part of that is I have to justify it in my head now, right? Because I've already made my conclusion. Now I have to justify it to you and myself. And so one of the easiest ways is just say, well, I don't trust that source, right? They're not valid. They're lying to you, blah, blah. So that's where we're at. We're at this point where we believe the things we believe so strongly, and we're so attached to them. Like it's become, even things that like really, that's something you really, were you concerned about that? Like last month, this seems like a thing I've never heard you talk about before. And now you're really concerned about it. Again, I'm not pointing at any one party here. And we all do this, right? So now these things get just attached to our identity. And now anybody that says a contrary thing, not only are they kind of wrong and dumb, they're just got evil intent. They're like bad people.
So what you're talking about now is political polarization. But how do you go? I guess the next step would be the extreme political polarization. And then the steps beyond that would be political violence. So what's the connection between the polarization and the violence?
Yeah, if you talk about polarization, there's sort of two main types to distinguish here. One is sort of issue polarization. So that's where the different parties, have different positions on issues, like how far apart are they on abortion or immigration, and that's issue polarization, and that's probably okay. Like you almost need some issue polarization, or we wouldn't know who to vote for. But that has become more extreme a little bit too. But it's not as much as people think. There's a real misperception about that. When you get down to the issues, there's a lot more similarities than people think. But the other type of polarization that social sciences world, political science world talks about, they call it affective polarization sometimes, and then sometimes you just go on and say it's like toxic polarization. And so that's more about how you feel about the other side and that you dislike them. So if you go one of the in 2020, there was a big research paper that came out and talked about they kind of call it political sectarianism, where it's become like a religion. Like my party is now kind of has replaced and become my religion. And so it's got three aspects to it. Not only are they kind of wrong and they have the wrong ideas, and I don't like them, so I don't like them. The third aspect is they're bad, like I was talking about before. So that's the kind of polarization that's kind of toxic, right? And we're talking about how to go from polarization to what again? I forgot. We're going to go from polarization to
political violence.
Oh, violence, right. So this is what happens now because they're evil, and I'm right. It's all part of kind of justifying that almost anything becomes justified, right? Because I'm on this, it becomes a moral issue. I'm on the moral good side. And if I believe that strongly enough, then you do start to you can justify these actions. They're morally bad. I'm like I'm helping the world here with my moral righteousness that now I can justify political violence or just in general violence. And that is not a very far leap. I mean, that we've seen that in history, right? That is not once you're at the boiling temperature that we're at, it's not a very far leap to go to violence. And that's true of both sides. And that there's research on this that has been, is controversial somewhat but the data shows that both Democrats and Republicans are about equally ready for committing violence. That people don't believe that. They think maybe it's only Republicans. But when you actually look at it, both sides at about the same rate are prepared for violence if necessary, right? So, and it's not as high as people might think, but it's still high enough to be concerned, right? And like I say, so it's not a real far leap to go there, from where we're at. And that's part of what, I try to talk about is just lowering this temperature. I mean, we can't get anywhere with this boiling temperature that we're at.
All right. So how do we break that cycle to prevent the risk of political violence?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a challenge. I mean, I'm to the point where I really believe it's more a bottom up thing. Like we've got to start saying we don't want to be like this anymore and push it from the bottom up. I mean, if you think about even something like the Trump movement, that really was more of a bottom up movement, right? There wasn't really people in the upper echelons of the Republican Party that said, let's go get Trump. I mean, in the beginning, they were sort of hoping he would go away. But it was more pushed up from his populist movement. And so things can happen from the bottom up. I think I'm using that as an example of that. And so I think that's probably because I don't think this is going to happen from the top down, right? There's too many incentives for the players that are in power, right? If you look at the media, they use this toxic kind of language all the time to get people riled up and to keep their viewership up and to get you to tune back in again. And it's interesting to see MSNBC's numbers have tanked a little bit, and I think it has to do with like they're tired of hearing it. Like maybe we'll see. I don't know. I don't have any data for that yet. That's just a theory. But I think something has kind of changed a little bit. The fact that their viewership has dropped that far. But the news media, is trying to do it. The online media, obviously, the social media platforms, they want you to click and like, and they've discovered the way you do that is get you riled up, get you mad, get you angry, get your emotions flowing. So all those places, it's not going to start with them, right? They're not going to cut into their bottom line to make the world better. Like they're just going to keep doing the thing. But for us, from the bottom up, we can maybe start asking for that change. Like we can stop sharing that stuff. We can stop clicking on it. We can, and we can try to promote candidates that behave differently. And you can also do things. It's easier to do things locally than nationally as well. So I think you can start working more locally with your local government, your school board, your city council, work locally in town, and you can find more places where you can go into a situation where you're trying to do something together. And I have come to the thinking that that's probably the path out of this is we start working together on things we care about. Because I do participate in something called Crossing Party Lines, which is about dialogue and understanding the other side. And I do think that's important. Those are good. It's really, you can work on your skills to have conversations with people that disagree with you, and also just be exposed to real world people as opposed to the stereotype, fake person that we think is this evil person that doesn't really exist, right? So that's all good. But I think the real effective path is when you go work on something together, because now we have a stake in it. It's not just, we're having a conversation, and isn't that great, and kumbaya at the end. Now we're actually trying to get something done. And so now we got to put ourselves in a room together, and we've got to figure out where those shared, values, those shared desires are, and get something done. So I think that's probably the path out is we've got to start figuring out how to work together and show that it can be done. And things aren't just, it doesn't work if we can't. I mean, one of the problems of our whole government system is design requires that you get in a room and work with people you don't necessarily like and you don't necessarily agree with. And we're not we're sort of told on TV, we're told on social media, you don't have to do that. You just have to win. And then if you win, you'll be able to do your thing. And and you'll be great. Well, no, because the other half of the country isn't going to let you win all the time. You're going to win some of the time. You're not going to win all the time. You're probably not going to hold enough majority margin. There's all this kind of reasons why that model doesn't work. Because there are going to be people with differing views, and you guys are going to have to work together. And we're going to have to come up with a broad consensus. I mean, they built our country on that premise. The whole idea was you didn't have a majority rule. You had more of you had to build some consensus to get things done. And the idea there was then extremes wouldn't be able to always dominate, or you'd have this kind of push-pull a little bit. And that was always kind of a important part of how things work too, right? You had this conservative voice and this progressive voice, and the conservatives kind of kept the progressives from getting out ahead of their skis. But if you didn't have progressives, we'd never do anything. So it was always like a compromise like that. And that was a good balance. But when it just becomes toxic where, well, you're not following progressive values, I'm not going to work with you at all. Or likewise, you're not following conservative values, I'm not going to work with you at all. Once that happens, well, now you can't solve any problem. So that's what I think. It starts locally, and I think it starts by doing stuff, and even if that's, just going and working in your, homeowners association and going and planting a few trees, right? If you go work with a set of your neighbors, you're probably going to find some neighbors that have different views than you, and you can go work together, and you can realize they're real people. They have kids. They they want good schools. They want good roads. They don't want potholes. There's a whole bunch of stuff that we all want together. We just think everybody is so opposite from us, and we can't get along with them in any way.
Okay. What are some of the most important lessons that you've learned about outrage culture since you started your podcast?
Well, I think the biggest thing that I've learned that's really important is how we're all susceptible to it. Everybody sort of sees the other side as worse, and that's okay. You can actually believe the other side is worse. But if you use that as an excuse to not do anything or not think that you can't work with them, then you're sort of part of the problem too, right? It doesn't help to stir that pot and get things heated up more because you think they're worse. They're going to be there, and like I said, you're going to have to deal with them. So I think that's the biggest thing, is that we're all in this, and we all really believe the other side's worse, and we all believe, and we have this idea that a lot of people, that even people that say they want to lower the temperature, and a lot of people do, like you see in studies, a lot of people are tired of the animosity and the anger and all this kind of stuff. And sure, there are people in the extremes that like it and all that, but even the people that say they don't like it, they wish it would go away, when you probe that a little deeper, it's often what they really want is they just want the other side to agree with them, right? And then we wouldn't have to fight. If you agree with me, we wouldn't have to fight. That's what my wife says, right? If you would just do what I said, you wouldn't have this problem.
Yep.
So really, that's not going to get us anywhere either, because you're not going to probably get everybody to agree, right? So on everything. So they're not going to come to agree with you in exact ways like that. So that's a little bit of a problem that we've got to get out of that mindset that our side, it's okay because our side will win, or I can bring them over to my way of thinking. We kind of have to stop being in that mindset and be more in a mindset, I'm going to have to work with people that I can't bring away into my way of thinking. And it's going to be hard. Like like I say, there's all these incentives against it. There's all these people that want to tell us that's not what you want to do. But the reality is that. So that's, I think, the biggest thing is that it affects all of us. There's nobody's better than anybody else here. And there's not some magic, the bad side and the good side. No, all these things affect all of us. And it's especially in ways we don't realize, right? I mean, we see it in the other people on the other side. We don't see it in ourselves or in people on our side. And that's where we have to really improve our kind of mindfulness about that and that's a big message that I try to get out there is that, just be mindful. There's a lot of people trying to get you riled up, right? So if you're watching the news media, you're watching, particularly if you're watching a partisan show, they're trying to get you mad, right? So just kind of go in with that lens and every once in a while go, wait, is that thing they said really true? Should I be that mad about it? They sure tried to get me mad about it. Should I be that mad about it? Maybe I should look into it a little more. And I think that's going to help everybody to do more of that. I think, I know from my show, for me personally, just all the stuff I've learned, it made me a lot more resilient to the kind of political stuff that's going on now. And I think I would have been in a lot worse shape if I hadn't been doing this show for the last couple of years, because it's like, yeah, this is what's going to happen, guys. This is how it works. You've been doing a show about this for 2 years, so this is what it looks like. And so that I think that's a big piece of it, is being more mindful about it. Like sometimes my wife and I will watch, the news. We'll say, well, we're going to put on one of the partisan channels now. So just remember, turn your dial up, turn your filter on to say these guys are going to try to make us mad. And so just be prepared for it and then say, okay, that was one. Look they said that thing. And then you go research a little bit. Okay, it wasn't quite. It happened one time in Czechoslovakia 25 years ago, but they're trying to make it sound like it's something running around rampant, right? So, I think that's a big one is that it all affects all of us, and just being mindful of it can really help lower your stress levels. Okay.
So despite all of that, are you seeing any hopeful signs in the way people are responding to outrage culture?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I talked with Peter Coleman, who's starts with us and a number of other related organizations that has been in this space for a long time and a real big expert on it. And he said, well, I have to say I've been doing this for, many decades, and it's not a feel good space, because it's tough. It's a lot of work. It's conflict management essentially, right? And conflict management is hard and conflict is complicated. And so yeah, but even given that, I think that's there's a few things that are hopeful signs for me. One is, there are a lot of organizations that have recognized this as a problem. Just the fact that there's so much science being done on it, so much research being done on, toxic polarization and the effects and these kind of things. People recognize that this is kind of a baseline problem we have to solve. It's a fundamental problem we have to solve to get anything else done. So like if you want to fix the electoral college or something like that, it's not going to happen in a polarized environment like this, right? Where no one will ever get on the table and work together, because those things require you to build a consensus. So you have to fix the toxic polarization problem before you can fix whatever else you want to fix, whatever side you're on. So that's a big thing, is that there's a lot of organizations looking at this. There's a lot of research being done on it. And there's studies showing, as I said, a lot of people are indicating that the Hidden Tribes research was from a few years ago, and they came up with this term, the exhausted majority, where they say, there's this misperception that we have this perception because social media feeds it, the news media feeds it, that there's this caricature of these people on the other side and they look like this and they're evil and they don't believe all the things they believe are totally opposite from what I believe. And the reality is almost no one toes the line of their party that way. They think everybody else does, and they think the other side does especially, but to a much larger degree than actually is true. They think the other side dislikes them more than they actually do. All those things. So there's these giant misperceptions. And when you actually get into it, you see that there's this, what they call this hidden, exhausted majority, which is people across the spectrum from left leaning and to all the way to right leaning and mid right, and of course more in the center as well. And they really are kind of fed up with it. Now, again, it comes back a little bit. What does that mean? And when you drill it down a little bit, but I mean, just the fact that people are saying, like, I don't want to be like this. I don't want it to be like this anymore. I think all of those are good signs. And there are some political movements. You even see a few politicians, having some of these conversations. Was it Spencer Cox in Utah is one that has done some interesting kind of anti-outrage ads, right? Where they are anti sort of, I don't know, call the other side evil ads, where he and his Democratic opponent did a campaign where they were both on the ad together, and they said things like, well, I don't agree with the many things that my opponent says, but, they have a family and they're a good person and they're a good American and they care about America just like I do. We just don't agree about all these things. And so I think that's great stuff, right? I mean, I think we have to really help, try to support the politicians, even if they're not necessarily on our side. We have to support the politicians that kind of dive into that kind of way of looking at things, because that's what has to be modeled for us more. And we're not getting that kind of modeling. You just get all this grandstanding and really being, very critical of the other side.
Do you ever give advice to someone who's struggling to cope with outrage culture in their own life?
Yeah, I mean, I do, because I get a lot of people asking me about it, and everybody kind of wants the silver bullet answer, and in fact, some of it feels kind of platitudes a little bit, but it's also shown that these things really do work. So some of it can be, some of the basics, like, are you getting enough sleep? Like, what's your sleep routine? Like, are you doom scrolling at night right as you're going to bed? That's probably a really bad idea. Don't do that. Come up with a sleep routine. Try to get a good night's sleep. Turn off the devices, put them in sleep mode or just flat turn them off. And those kind of things, again, sound like platitudes a little bit, but it really matters. But this mindfulness is also a big one, right? So just be more mindful of that. There's all these sort of bad actors, if you want to say, or just business. And there's business reasons, there's monetary reasons why a lot of people want to get you excited and mad, and just be sort of mindful of that. Like, it's okay. I mean, I don't tell people to necessarily disconnect from news media, but sometimes I'll say a detox may not be bad. Like, take a couple hours off a day, or do less time in it, or, pick a different network, try a different network for a week, something like that. Or, sometimes I also suggest things like try going deep this week instead of broad. So maybe pick a topic and you're just going to focus on that one topic this week and go a little deeper in that topic. See if you can find more solid journalism about that. So some of these things seem really simple, but they do matter. So I think mindfulness, having a lens for this outrage media that's out there, is a big one. And just, some of these basic practices to stay calm. There's other techniques some of the people we've had on the show have talked about as well, of figuring out the things that, some of these deep questions we never ask ourselves, right? Who do you want to be? What's important to you? If you don't know that, it's really hard to do any of this other stuff, right? So kind of try to get a sense of that. And then, okay, now you know that better. So let's focus on the thing. If this thing you're doing that's making you mad, does that align with that other part, all those things you said you want to be, and who you want to be, and what goals you want to achieve? Is it helping you achieve those goals and things like that? And then, shift some of your energy towards those things that take you in those directions, and less in these things that aren't. Like, if it's not helping you to get in a Twitter fight on a Tuesday, then don't do that. Like, it's not helping you. It's not getting you anywhere. So some of those kind of things, but that's a biggie, is really just how you spend your time doing media, and how you spend your time communicating with folks too, right? I think if you're going to try to do one-on-one communications, go and update your attitude a little bit. Like, it's not a good attitude to go in with, I'm going to change their mind. They're wrong, I'm going to fix them. And that's what we often do. We sort of go in with this, they're wrong, I'm going to fix them. You have to try to go in with, I'm going to try to understand them, and learn something. We're going to go on a journey together to try to understand why we look at this thing differently. We're not going to fact check each other to death. We're just going to try to understand why we look at this thing differently. And then if you get to the point where you want to do some persuasion, go learn some persuasion techniques. But don't expect a lot out of it. It hardly ever works. And is it worth the effort? You know, and are you going to risk that friendship? That kind of thing. You might get more out of it if you just try to understand better. And that also might help you understand you better.
That's a great point. So doing your podcast and other areas where you're involved, has the market been receptive to what you offer, or have you encountered a whole different level of outrage supporters?
Yeah, I mean, we get some pushback for sure. I mean, there's a lot of people, like I said, I've had on some of these organizations like Braver Angels, Crossing Party Lines, Living Room Conversations, those kind of organizations that are out there trying to teach or model these difficult conversations, like having conversations with people that have different views and perspectives than you do. And I get a lot of pushback or feedback about that like, that's not doing anything. Like, I've tried that. It doesn't help, So you get some feedback. I do get some feedback like that sometimes. And people just get frustrated sometimes. I'm trying to be, and all you want me to do is be nice. I'm not necessarily just being nice. I mean, being nice is fine, but it's also be introspective and try to be curious. I mean, those are a couple of the big factors, because it doesn't do any good. Just to be nice doesn't really get you anywhere either, right? Because now you're probably stewing underneath. You're just being nice on the outside, so you're not really genuinely trying to learn anything. So try to translate that to a curiosity, and you get some, and I get some pushback about that as well. Like, okay, I did the thing. I was curious. I talked to him, but he still has these terrible ideas. It's like, well, you're probably not going to change what you call those terrible ideas. You'll have to maybe try to keep understanding more about where these ideas come from. I mean, what you find is many times these things are sort of personal, right? Like, well, I don't like immigration because my uncle, lost his job, because, in my mind, some immigrants, so it might be something personal that happened in their life. And that's going to be real hard to change their mind on, right? So whatever, I think that's probably one of the places where I get the most pushback, where people are like sort of frustrated with, why aren't you giving me the silver bullet solution to changing the other people's mind? That's what a lot of people want. And, and that's really not what our show is. Our show isn't really, we're not in the business of changing people's mind. We're not trying to pitch any particular policy on issues. What we're trying to pitch is, curiosity, empathy, and your own, for your own mental health, building some resiliency to all this outrage that's out there.
All right. So I only have a couple questions left as we start to wind down the conversation. So can you share some strategies for reducing polarization and fostering a sense of community that can sort of get this effort off the ground and keep the momentum going? Yeah,
I mean, it's funny because I always try to get those kinds of information from guests. Like some of the academics sort of say, well, sorry, I don't have any solutions for you. I can only tell you about the problem. So not everybody has solutions, but I always try to see what people think about it and what ideas that they have. And one of the big thoughts in this whole space is it's a little bit like what happens, what people talk about with addiction, that people talk about, we sort of have to get to some kind of a rock bottom before we'll not want to be like this anymore and want to do something about it. And I'm concerned that I don't know how bad that rock bottom's got to be, because if it hasn't been some of the things that have already happened, then what's it going to take? So I am concerned about that. But that's what a lot of folks think. And I think one of the best paths is, like I said, I think one strategy is more local, focusing more local and working on building things together. I know I've already talked about that a little bit, but I think that's a realistic path, because it achieves two things when you actually do that. You get something done, but B, you also get experience with the realities of what that's like, and get a more realistic picture of your political adversaries, right? Because you're spending time with them, you're trying to work with them, you're trying to get something done, and it can help break some of those stereotypes and set a path, I think, for a whole new way of building together. So I think that is one of the biggies, but not all of us have like the energy or time to go run for school boards and stuff like that. So, but even outside of that, I think focusing more locally, even if you want to be engaged in politics, which I think everyone should be engaged. I'm not telling people to get disengaged from politics, but maybe spend a little more energy on these local issues than national, because we've sort of lost a lot of local journalism. So these national media, it just wants to talk about these national things, where it's much harder. Not many of us have a lot of influence at that level, right? Unless you really are deep into the political world, you don't have much influence in what happens at the national level, but you can have a little more influence, or even just, maybe it matters to you. The other side is true too, right? These things that are happening locally probably have more impact on you, especially in more immediate ways than some of these national issues. So being a little bit more interested and focused on that, I think, can help a little bit, because can take some of that discouragement that we can't do much about those national issues away, right? So now we can look at some of these local issues that have more impact on me. So I think that can help a little bit. That's a couple of the biggies. I think a lot of it just starts with us, right? A lot of it is we can individually do more than we're doing, right? We don't have to react to this stuff. You can take a step back, ask, and the big question I always tell people to ask: am I getting the full picture here? Right? Did they leave some stuff out? Like not very often is media really just flat out lying. I mean, they do, sure, once in a while. More than often than not, though, they just left some stuff out to try to create a narrative that made sense for whatever it was they were trying to get you riled up about. So they probably left some stuff out. Like they might have left out the thing that, oh, this only happened once in a southern South American country one time, like 35 years ago. They make it so it's that kind of stuff. Like they just left something out that probably was important to the story about whether I should be excited about this or not. And that's true more often than not, that something got left out. There's probably a little bit more to this story, and it's uncomfortable sometimes, because, right, it's a heavy lift, right? So that's the downside. It's a heavy lift that they did that. So it's really, and it also, like you talked in the beginning about trusting journalism. Well, if journalists are going to leave stuff out all the time, then yeah, I'm not going to trust them, am I? Right? So they have to. To some degree, journalists do have to have to earn some of that back. And we do have it's a challenging news landscape that we're in right now. There is really good journalism, but there's also a lot of really bad journalism, and separating the two is really hard. There's no magic single answer to that. That's one question a lot of people have, is what's the magic way to get good news? And, there isn't, I can't give you a publication that's going to always be good. Even a good publication like the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal is going to have some bad stuff too, or some bad work. Some journalism wasn't great. And that's true especially of the opinion pieces and all that, but it's also true of news. Like sometimes they do a bad news story. They got the logic wrong. They did a bad job putting things together. And so there's no magic answer there either. Like I can't say just always go read this newspaper. It's always good. Certainly there's ones that are good more often, but it's still kind of just an average of how often are they good. So yeah, it's a very tough communication or information landscape that we're in, and it's work, right? So critical research is work. Doing that scientific type thinking. It's not so much knowing scientific facts, but it's doing that scientific type thinking where you appreciate, is there a logical fallacy here? Is there is there cause correlation, difference between cause and correlation? Are they making some kind of a crazy estimate that's just way off? Like it doesn't make sense. Like you can't get from there to there. They're off by 10 or 100 or 1,000. So that kind of just building some of those skills that you get some time to work on that. It's a heavy lift. I mean, it really is. And it's unfortunate that that's the only way to get better information, is to do more of that research yourself, or more of that, I shouldn't say research, more of that thinking yourself, more of that analysis yourself. Maybe there will be AI that can help us with that at some point, but at this point, the AI is much a problem as it is good in this chance, but there's a chance that the AI can maybe help with some of that.
Yeah, it seems like on some level, AI will make us even lazier thinkers than we already are. Of course, it makes things more expedient, but it doesn't. It takes away our opportunity to dig deeper into areas where we're interested, and maybe veer off into something else that we weren't even aware of. So AI instead just crafts something quickly based on other people's post online, and then that could be a whole different problem. Then you could have another show called AI.
Oh yeah, you could definitely have a whole show on that. and I'm beginning to do a little bit more because I come from a tech background, so I'm starting to bring more of that into the show. So I've started a segment I'm calling the Silicon Valley Hall of Shame. And I've had a few experts on that, and we've had a few episodes about AI, but I'm going to be doing more on that. But yeah, and the other thing about most of the current AIs are also trying to really be like positive towards you. So if they think you want a certain answer, they're going to help you get that answer, right? So they're not necessarily going to be critical for you unless you ask them to be, right? But if you say this is a pretty good idea, right? They're going to be going, yeah, this sounds like a good idea.
So biased artificial intelligence now.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and there is research to show that it is biased, because the source material that's out there is a bit biased. But yeah, it's also biased in that way where it's trying to make you happy, might make you feel good.
All right. So as a final question today, do you have any general information you'd like to leave the audience that can be utilized going forward to maybe lower the temperature for themselves or other people, or even if it's off topic, feel free to go on whatever direction you want.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you want to get into trying to work on some conversations, I would look up Crossing Party Lines. They have Zoom. They do things on Zoom, so it doesn't matter where you are, you can participate. They do conversations a couple times a month. You can just get some practice being involved in a conversation where you're going to hear opposing views, so you get some experience with that. If that's a direction you're interested in, that's one way to do that. I think if you want to think about maybe some media sources, there's something called 1440 News, which is a newsletter, and it's curated. And what it does is it drops you a email every day with, it's like a 15-minute read, maybe 10 or 15-minute read. You don't have to read it all, but I mean, it's got like some of the highlights of what happened today and the stories that they pick. They try to pick stories that aren't biased, or certainly aren't as biased. And when they have their own take on things, it's not as biased as you might find. So they try to eliminate the ones that are trying to really be partisan. And so that's, if you want a little bit like a quick take each day where I talked about how much of a heavy lift it is to get good information. 1440 News is a great way to get a set of stories that will be well curated to not be overly biased. I think those are two good resources.
All right. That's some great information as we wind up this episode. So our guest today has been Outrage Overload podcast host, David Beckemeyer. David, thanks so much for joining me today. I've enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, Melvin, thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Yes. So if you don't already follow me on Spotify or some other podcast platform, I would appreciate it if you would do that now. And please share this episode with a friend. I'd appreciate that also. That's it for this week's episode of Stories from Real Life. Join us again next time for another chance to learn from each other's stories and journeys. Until then, don't forget to shine your light wherever you go.
That was Stories from Real Life. Join us again next week for another great storytelling journey. See you next time.